What's the most ducked up thing someone has told you about themselves after barely getting to know them? This was a patient, middle-aged guy in short-term nursing home for a hip replacement or something. I'm trying to get to know him to figure out what kind of skills he may need to work on in order to return home safely. I ask him, "Do you cook?" He responds, "I used to, but then the cops found out." Story 2. Years ago, I went on a date with a guy I met via AL Personals. Within 5 minutes of the date, he told me he was working on a book about speed seduction. And he was so confident he could speed seduce me, he already had a condom on ready for me. I hightailed out of there full speed. I Googled him a while back, and turns out he ended up self-publishing the book. I did find out he posted to some seduction forum that has long since been shut down. He used a nickname I went by at the time with this glorious, creepy fairy tale about how his seduction worked, and he slept with me. Needless to say, I created an account on the forum using the nickname and gave the true account of how the date went. The thread was deleted by the next day. Story 3. This happened to my wife. We had just moved into a new house, and the lady next door came over to introduce herself to my wife. As she was talking, she informed my wife that her husband was mad at her because she had farted when he was going down on her. Story 4. I was doing a service call at a house and just making small talk when the owner mentioned out of the blue that she's married to her uncle. I've been there twice, and both times they felt the need to tell me. It's kind of weird. Story 5. I was a teenager working retail, and there was a fidgety older woman I worked with. I was always very nice to her, but she was just a coworker at the end of the day. One day, she told me about her grandpa molesting her. Her parents didn't believe her, so it continued until he died. She said she was glad he died and was happy at his funeral. I really had no clue what to say since this was out of nowhere. I just said I was really sorry it had happened. Felt really bad for her because I could tell it still really bothered her. Commenter? My mom still denies it happened to me. I've come to realize that if she ever admitted, even to herself, that someone put their hands on her, and not only did she not stop it, she didn't even suspect it, it would destroy her. Add the layer of it being someone who was supposed to be her partner, and that is just the disgusting cherry on top. She's denying it because admitting it would irrevocably break her. While I don't agree with it, I can understand it. We just don't talk about it anymore. Story 6. At work me. Hey, new guy. Nice to meet you. New guy. Yeah, you too. Check out this picture of a dude in a coffin. That's my nephew. He was died in a drive-by last month. Me. Let me show you where the coffee maker is. Commenter. I went with my dad to do an estimate for some work on a house. When I met the owners, I literally only said, "Hi, your house is gorgeous." And the wife went into full detail on how they'd bought it the year before because their daughter got pregnant from casual sex. They were super religious and convinced her to keep the baby. They pulled her out of college for a year while she was pregnant. They bought the new house in a new school district so she could go finish high school without having to face her former classmates. They were now raising the baby as her younger brother. I was pretty much speechless. What do you even say to that? Story 7. That he broke in and beat the crap out of a guy who molesting his daughter put the guy in the hospital. I totally get why he did it, but I have no idea why he thought it was a good story to tell a new coworker. Story 8. I was buying an AC at Home Depot during Black Friday sales. There were none on the shelf, so an employee was helping me get the display model. He carried it all the way to the cashier for me. I thanked him and wished him a happy holiday season. A shadow crossed his face, and he looked me straight in the eye and told me he killed someone a year ago during the holidays. It was ruled an accident, but he said he won't ever celebrate a holiday again because of that. Edit to add more info and answer a couple questions. I thought the employee was ducking with me as well. I did some searching online when I got home and found the news article, and he did indeed hit and kill a man. It was a super raining evening and just starting to get dark. The person killed was heavily intoxicated and veered into the oncoming traffic. Story 9. Lady at work started telling me about land she owned in another state that is not part of America. She then started talking about how every American is a bond to the government, and your SN is just your bond number. Wealthy people own those bonds and own you. She started naming off prices of bonds based off people's races and genders. This was all said after I simply asked her what she was doing with her long weekend coming up. Story 10. When I was around 10, I lived beside this weird family. The little girl was probably 4 or 5, always clinging to me anytime we were outside. She talked incessantly and always wanted to hang out with me, asking to come into my house. She annoyed me so badly, but she was really sweet and excited about everything. One day she tells me, "Do you ever naked wrestle with your dad?" I told her that's really weird, and no, I don't even know what that means. She then tells me she and her dad and brother naked wrestle a lot. Forgive me, but I was 10. I had no idea what the duck I was being told. I still think about that to this day. The guilt eats at me. I wish I had understood more and told someone. I also had a classmate in high school I'd give rides to and from school so she wouldn't have to make her dad do it. After we graduated, I saw her working at the mall. She then told me her dad used to molest her and she was finally able to see a therapist and work through it. When someone says these things happen more often than we realize, they're not wrong. Story 11. I had to stay late when I was a manager as one of the female employees' parents were running late. She broke down to me about how she had been abused by her best friend's father and that he had been doing it to her best friend for years. He was in jail after he did it to her, as she reported him, and sadly, the daughter hated her for turning in her father as she thought it was normal behavior. She had only been working there for a few weeks at this point, and we had probably only worked together a handful of times, so I really didn't know her that well yet. But I think she just needed someone to know she was struggling with it and someone to tell her it wasn't her fault and what he did was wrong. Commenter: I think it's easier to tell a thing like this to someone you don't know well. I'm good friends with someone now who, at the beginning of our friendship, confided a similar thing to me, and they hadn't told other friends they'd known for much longer. I think there's a bit of safety in the idea that even if they get rejected by this person, at least they didn't know them well, and it's a hell of a thing to hold on to alone, you know? Agreed. When I was a 17-year-old bank teller, a customer responded to my "How are you today?" with "Not great. I just found out my husband has been cheating me." I think she just desperately needed to tell someone, and I was a safe outlet. Story 12. New roommate told me her current boyfriend got kicked out of college for assault and was under investigation for another case of assault. Wanted my opinion about it within like 2 hours or meeting. Completely disregarded that my opinion was run. Story 13. Well, after 2 15-minute conversations with my neighbor, he wants to get a surrogate from a developing country so that his child will never be able to find their biological mother. Women in these countries are not listed on birth certificates, either surrogate or egg donor. He asked me if I'd be willing to consider surrogacy. I am currently pregnant. I am somewhat nervous about this neighbor now because he has asked a lot of questions about our house and our baby's due date, info on the pregnancy, the plan for the birth, etc. Suffice to say, I won't be hanging out in the front garden with the kiddo when they're born. Edit. Damn. Reddit. Apologies. I genuinely didn't realize that this interaction could be read as my neighbor being a gay, guys, and getting married. Him looking into surrogacy is kind of normal. It's just very odd to bring it up to your pregnant neighbor the way that he did, and his interest in my pregnancy baby makes me nervous because some people who want kids can be nuts, and he's clearly shown he doesn't have much of a social behavioral filter. So yes, he'd be a terrible parent, and is likely a misogynist. I feel kind of bad I've painted him in that light. It wasn't my intention at all. Story 14. Hitchhiking through New Zealand. I got picked up by a semi-driver. Awesome guy, but an hour into the drive started unloading every bit of personal information he could. How he's cheated on his wife, screwed the company out of money, stolen items. It was like I was a priest in a confession booth. When I asked him why he told me all of that, he said it's been eating him up inside for years and telling me helped get it off of his chest. He said I had no idea who he or anyone he knew was, so it felt like I was the perfect person to unload on. Story 15. Guy walks into my bar, which is down the street from a hospital. He's pretty quiet, so I'm not trying to push for a conversation. Next thing I know, he breaks down crying at the bar. I go to ask if he's okay, if I need to call him a cab, etc. He told me his teenage son had just died in the hospital down the street about an hour earlier. I had no idea what to say or how to react. Commentaire. I drive taxi. Most customers are people coming or going to hospital or other medical appointments. It's crazy how much I've heard. Sometimes people have need to tell someone. Just a couple weeks ago, there was an older lady who had just lost her husband. I try to listen and give compassion. Still don't know how I should react. Good of you to listen. You cared enough to ask. Story 16. I had a guy tell me that he and his cousin slept with the same person. Another guy telling me that when his cousin died, he wanted to drink himself to death. This was a first date. I also had some girl I went to college with randomly tell me over Facebook that had her first sex with her cousin. Story 17. When I used to work in construction, I was on a project with this old guy that told me he was once accused of abusing his daughter. But after an investigation was conducted, it turned out it was his brother who committed the crime. Way too much information. Had another idiot showing everyone pictures on his phone of him and his stripper wife having a kex with someone. Can't say I missed the trades. Commenter. Yep. Had a drywaller say, "Hey, Mr. Canoe, you want to see some naked pictures of my wife?" Then he rushes out to get them before I could say no thanks. He comes back in all pissed off. They had been on the dashboard of his truck, but someone had stolen them. Story 18. Yesterday, I was walking with a friend of a friend after my friend left me. He started telling me benefits of NoFap and his pervertness out of nowhere, like telling me how it had affected him and his life personally. He told me how he'd doing himself good in a train sitting with all his friends in such a way nobody noticed. Then he goes on telling me how he asked his father for help, for which his father asked him to drink buttermilk because apparently it reduces the addiction. Story 19. We were 17, first year of uni, and I had known the guy for a week or two tops. Out of ducking nowhere, he tells me he had a kink for getting farted in the face by girls. I pissed myself laughing, and we became good friends for a while. Story 20. When I was in rehab, my roommate, whom was only 18, told me that she had been stripping and selling herself to get her dope, and that you can connect the dots of the scars on her arm. Being an ex-heroin addict myself, abscesses weren't anything new, but the fact that this tiny little 18-year-old girl She couldn't have weighed more than 90 pounds, had *9 abscess scars on just one arm. I just couldn't even wrap my head around that. You hear some of the worst ducking stories ever in rehab, and I've been to 10 during my entire addiction. But this was one of the worst I had ever heard, especially because she was so nice and had such an innocent way about her. It was heartbreaking. Story 21. My favorite ever was some stranger outside a bar. Seemed normal enough until she said, "My husband and I used to do meth, but we don't anymore." I applauded her on this, and then she followed up with, "Yeah, now we only have Groogs weekends." Story 22. I'm a female, and I met a girl at a local coffee joint. There were regulars coming there for months, so we chatted casually. But one day, I was going to drive to see friends 3 hours away for a fun-filled weekend. She said it sounded fun, and I don't know why, but I invited her. She said yes, and I picked her up the next day. Mind you, we were both around 19. Well, it was a 3-hour journey of hearing her life stories. She told me she was bulimic and used to hide jars of vomit under her bed from her parents, so she wouldn't get in trouble. She ran away and left them there. Then I heard about an Amtrak ride she took when running away. That was 3 days long. She met an older couple on there and spent the 3 days doing droogs and having kex with them. I'm sure there was more, but those things stuck with me. She ended up getting pregnant by another guy at the coffee joint who she constantly told everyone how big his banana was. I never saw her after that. Naive 19 Yumi just sat there driving and thinking, holy duck. Me now is still thinking, holy duck, to be honest. I hope she's okay. 19-year-old me had no idea how to support her. Story 23. I started working at a flower shop as a delivery driver, and on the very first day of training, the woman I was paired with proceeded to tell me all about how she was still processing her parents' deaths. Went into great detail. Explained the stresses of funeral arrangements and how she had to dress her mother for the viewing because her siblings weren't able to handle it. Even told me about a text message she believes she had gotten from her mother after she passed. I did my best to be sympathetic, but we were out on a 4-hour delivery drive, and she definitely took the opportunity of a captive audience to dump a serious amount of baggage. At a certain point, I just didn't know what to say anymore. Edit. Her parents had passed away 3 years prior when we talked. Story 24. Had to get my picture taken for a visa, so went to a local photography shop that took the pictures and printed them out for you right there. I had been talking to the guy as he worked on other people's photos, and when I finally got my picture taken, he started opening up about his family. Apparently, his son was died 3 years ago in a car accident, and he was telling me how much I reminded him of his son, going to school for engineering, first-generation college student, etc. The son was killed in his senior year, so didn't even get to graduate. He even showed me pictures. It was heartbreaking. To make things worse, he said he had a muscular disease, and doctors had given him about 2-3 years before he'd be bedridden. He then went on to say his daughter was taking care of him and how she isn't married yet and deserves to live a young person's life and man. It really put into perspective how bad some people have it. I still think about that guy to this day and hope he's doing well. Story 25. I sat next to this quiet kid in my Spanish class. He was awkward and had a subtle speech impediment. One day I tried to spark conversation with him and he told me he was thinking of robbing his parents. Story 26. At a work Christmas party, it was mentioned we were going to Vancouver for a meeting next month. New guy is so excited he's losing his mind. He proceeded to tell us about how they have the best massage, happy ending kind parlors. He went on and on about how great they were last time he went. He also told us about etiquette and what to expect. He was married with 3 kids, and all I could think of is what kind of crap is he not telling me if he is this open about this? Story 27. A customer explained to me the benefits of a coffee enema to heal everything from my acne to preventing cancer. I couldn't get her to leave me alone for an hour because it was dead and no one was there to help. I worked for a skincare counter in a department store. Like, if you don't need my products because cleaning your ass with coffee fixes it, why are you here? But she went on about how she started her kids on these and did their enemas until they could do theirs on their own. What? Then she also grabbed my hands and kept saying, "Promise me you'll try it. Promise me." She left after I promised. No, I didn't try it. Story 28. I grew up somewhere that gets very cold and dark in the winter months. In my mid-20s, I worked for a medium-sized local bank that had bought an even smaller bank. Right before close, during a snowstorm, a woman came in with really old financial documents that smelled of mildew. She claimed her husband had accounts with the current bank and that she needed all the money out and close accounts. Problem was the paperwork she had was not for either of the banks described, and her husband was not in the system. Then she proceeded to tell us how her husband had died after being attacked by a werewolf who was actually her husband's brother, and that her husband was also a werewolf. She claimed she needed the money for protection. After muttering a little more and randomly walking around the lobby agitated, she left. Luckily, my manager was really cool and dealt with talking with her, and I was a bystander. But it was still a very weird thing to hear, especially under the circumstances. Gave bad vibes for sure. Story 29. A guy told me during our first shift that his youngest, the daughter, has mental health issues. His eldest daughter's boyfriend was terribly abusive. and his wife was sleeping with someone at her work. Apparently, he'd just gotten out of jail after flying home from out of state, beating out of his daughter's boyfriend, his brothers, and his dad, driving to his wife's work and beating the crap out of her boyfriend, then driving to the hospital to hold his daughter's hand until the cops arrived to arrest him for aggravated assault. Story 30. Worked in a catalog store and sold a middle-aged lady a dictaphone after she sheepishly asked me if there was something she could use to record people without them knowing. It was weird, but who am I to judge? I just work the tills and suggest the items. However, she then decides to tell me she needs it because she's being bullied or harassed in her home. So she buys the dictaphone and I think nothing of it. On my next shift, she is back in and demanding to speak to me about the device. First words out her mouth are, "Should there already be voices on it?" I was kind of weirded out and surprised to hear that the device had already been used. But then she leans across the counter and suddenly begins telling me, in whisper tone, that she's being attacked by spirits in her home, and she needs proof. She plays the dictaphone without being prompted to do so. Anyway, there's nothing ghostly on it, just some mundane household sounds and EastEnders, a British soap opera. She became quite fond of me. Came in repeatedly to tell me about the ghosts, but it just seemed so crazy that within like 2 shifts, she had unloaded all her delusions. She even asked to know where I had went after moving away. My old colleagues obviously didn't tell her. She was a harmless lady, just a bit odd. Story 31. Temporary coworker tells me she was kidnapped and beaten by her ex-husband. The incident resulted in a baby she somehow still has, and they're not even divorced because he won't sign the divorce papers. I work in a small-town gas station. I'm trying to check out customers, and she's reciting a true crime episode to me. The conversation started with mascara recommendations. It was the craziest thing I've ever heard. Story 32. Like 3 or 4 years ago, I sat down in a waiting room for an appointment, and the guy next to me started talking about how he got 2 potatoes stuck inside him. Who dare give me any award? God damn it, all the notifications for awards. Please stop, ha ha ha, funny, giving me rewards, please stop. There's too many notifications. No, seriously, stop. There are 2 people who gave me gold. I really think you all are trying to one-up each other while simultaneously spamming me with R words. It's a waste, please stop for all of our sakes. Story 33. Used to work at a ski resort and was working in a different area than I normally work. Well, this lady who I was working with found out I was slightly acquainted with her fiancé and proceeded to tell me all about how his family hates her and is mean to her, and all about his substance abuse issues. I don't remember all the details because it was a few years ago, but she unloaded on me with every issue of her relationship, and I'm like, I'm just here to work. I didn't really even know her fiancé. I avoided that lady after that. Lady. Story 34. I had to pick up a friend of a friend from her job before going to a party. I'd never met her before that night. When I got out of the car at her job site, she came out screaming and running towards me and jumped into my arms like we were longtime friends. This was in Canada, so I shrugged it off as some strange Canadian greeting. We went back to the hotel suite to prep for the party with a few other people. We were drinking heavily and making small talk when I mentioned I gotta hop in the shower before the party starts. All of a sudden, she sticks her hand in her pants, pulls it out, and sniffs it. Making a face, she says, "Yep, I need one too. I'll join you." Before I knew what was happening, she grabbed my arm and was pulling me to the bathroom. Keep in mind, this all happened in front of several people. They knew her, but I didn't, and they were laughing their asses off. Apparently, she had a reputation of being a sort of crazy, free-spirited person. I was too drunk to think about what was happening and was kinda in shock. I didn't know if she was weird or was coming on to me, but I did need to take a shower, so I went along with it. Later that night, we ended up running around Toronto, singing and dancing in a drunken mess of a good time. It was certainly the strangest interaction I've had with someone I just met. Edit. To answer a couple questions in the comments, I am a guy, and there was no sex. Just an unexpected and friendly shower with a girl I met that night. Story 35. I had a colleague in the former place I worked, and for months, he basically ignored me. Not even a good morning or anything, which was fine by me since I didn't have to work with him. Then one day, while I had my lunch break and was sitting outside by myself, he joins me and starts to chat with me as if we'd been buddies for ages. He was going through a bitter divorce at that time, and after a few minutes, we're knee-deep in all the crafty things his ex-wife did and what he would like to do to her. It was graphic and drastic, to say the least. Since I was new and as junior as it was possible to be, I didn't dare to tell him how ducked up I thought that was, but just dully peppered the one-sided conversation with, and I see, in the most uninterested sounding tone possible, hoping it would steer him away from the topic. No dice, and I had to endure half an hour of his ramblings. On the plus side, he never even see his ex-wife again, let alone did any of the things he had said. Maybe he just needed to vent that day, but sure as hell it ducked up my lunch break. Story 36. In third-year university, heading home from a late night of studying for midterms, I met a kid crying in one of the stairwells of the university center. I asked him if he was all right and sat down with him. He was a foreign student, his English wasn't strong, but he said his life was over, family was going to disown him, he had nowhere to go, etc. So I asked some more questions, and then he came out and said he thinks he's gay, and his parents are from a conservative culture which says it's not okay. He doesn't know anyone here other than a few ultra-conservative foreign students from his country, and he felt like there was nothing he could do, nowhere he could go. All that, I felt so bad for the guy. He asked if he could hug me, which was a bit awkward, but I said yeah and held him for a bit. Then we spoke for another, 30 minutes, and I told him all about the free counseling options at the school and how nice and understanding they were for my mental issues. Told him that his sexuality wasn't as rare as he thought, and there were plenty of gay people at the school, some of whom felt just like him. I gave him a business card for the counselor I was seeing, gave him my number if he wanted to talk, and headed out. He called me to talk and meet up on campus and thanked me a few weeks later, and then I never saw him again. Hope the dude's found comfort in his skin and a happy life in Canada. Story 37. After a few hours of meeting a new coworker at my job, one of the first things she told me was how much she hated her husband and how twice a day she tells him how much she wants to divorce him. She also showed me a picture of her ex-husbands and laughed manically as she told me how she never loved him and that she just married him despite his mom. I've met her husband she's with now, and he's super cool and makes literally $5,000 a month at his job. So I was genuinely confused and terrified to work with her after that. Story 38. Started to work with my coworker. He kept falling asleep on me. On day 2, I asked him if he was okay because he constantly falls asleep. He tells me he has insomnia. Makes sense, I feel bad for the guy. An hour goes by, he nods off again. This is scary because he's a driver, I yell, wake up. He jolts awake, goes back to driving, apologizes. Then begins telling me what happened and why he can't sleep. About 10 years ago, he was going through a divorce. Apparently, his daughter's bedroom got broken into and she beaten nearly to death. The assailant went to the mother's bedroom and beaten her. He goes on to say the cops arrested him right away since he was the #1 suspect, questioning him about the situation, to which he had no clue to what they were going on about. He had to get a laywere, and after a few days of questioning, they had to release him because they had no evidence that it was him. His voice changed when he told me this, and while he said, he was a friend of the family's, I wonder what happened to him. Guess we will never know, but they got nothing on me. In a more menacing voice, after a long pause, it seemed like he caught himself and turned to me and said back in his original fungi sweet voice, but I wasn't anywhere near. So I don't know how they did suspect me for it, and that's why I have trouble sleeping every night for the last 10 years. I just got chills and thought to myself, holy duck, you did it, didn't you? Story 39. Visited a coffee shop for the first time on holiday. Barista commented on my tattoos. I said thank you. She told me she's not allowed to get tattoos, but she cuts herself to enjoy the pain, and that's nearly the same thing. I found a different coffee shop for the rest of the holiday. Story 40. First impression of a Dungeons and Dragons group. DM talks about how he went to a sleep, over which was basically a hot party, and had someone get a full bottle of Febreze sprayed up him. Edit, I want to clarify, we stayed in that D&D group for the entirety of 2020 and only just recently cut ties with the DM. Story 41. First time meeting a lady while I was bartending. One drink in, she proceeds to tell me that her husband cheated on her, so she cheated on him with a young Jehovah's Witness that had showed up at her front door. She ended up getting knocked up by the Jehovah's Witness and now has a child out of wedlock. I literally never even got her name. Story 42. First session with a new massage therapist. Me, relaxing and enjoying the massage. She also told me all about her prior heroin addiction, bouts of homelessness, abusive previous marriage, and then tried to sell me some kind of $12,000 magnetic mat to lay on to heal all your things that need healing. Story 43. Chatted with a huge middle-aged dude in a bar once who, after about 2 minutes, told me that he had been in prison for bashing his dad's head. His dad used to beat his mom, and one day he'd had enough of it. Story 44. I worked with this girl for maybe 2 days. I previously introduced myself, but I hadn't actually had a chance to talk to her, and so I asked her if she had a good weekend. And the first thing she told me was she went to a follow-up doctor visit from having a miscarriage. Caught off guard, I gave her my condolences. She would loop the convo back to her miscarriage and how devastating it was every single time I had to talk to her again after that. Story 45. It was day 1 of me working at a place, and the person that was training me told me she was conceived during a random sex. I learned later that she did the same thing to everyone working there. I have no idea why. She was a strange person. Story 46. I was 11 years old at camp. I was the quiet girl who just wanted to read in her corner, who didn't want to be there. I struggled to make friends, but I wasn't really trying anyway. So this loud, talkative girl befriended me. She cursed every other word and she was IDK, rough around the edges. I was a butt curious about her, but I was trying to shake her off during the first day. She was sometimes insulting and quite abrasive. Anyway, on the second day, she spent most of the day describing how her mother was abusing her and her siblings, how she had tried getting away through the window, how Child Protective Services didn't do anything, how her dad was every bit just as bad, so it was a relief he was gone, how she rarely ate enough, and her mom would deprive her of supper every other day, how she had 2 younger siblings, so she took the worst of the abuse to protect them. I remember being completely shaken by her story. I come from a loving family with healthy parents, and it was the first time I even considered that a parent would harm their child this way. I remember telling my parents that night, and I don't think anything ever came of it. Story 47. Stuck driving a coworker out to a remote gas plant to do a system install. He was kind of ducked up, but assumed it was just socially awkward way. Nope. He starts telling me about him and his dad collecting memorabilia and how proud he was of his German grandparents, trying to make others small talk, and he would just trail off answering questions and start singing to himself. Thought for sure I'd end up on the news and a manhunt would be conducted. Second best story. Met the neighbor right after we moved in, and she started telling me about them wanting another kid. But doing the deed was hard because she was overweight and had bad knees, and it just made it difficult. I'm a guy who never met her and have my kids playing mere feet away, so I can't call her bat crap crazy. Story 48. I just started working at a farm. On the first day, my boss saw a penny on the ground and looks at me. It says, "Look at me. I'm Jewish," as she bends over to pick it up. She was not Jewish, but I am. Story 49. I was on a university trip to New York. There were people from my course year group, and people from the same course in the year below. Naturally, I knew a lot of the students in the year below by their faces, but only a couple of them I knew enough to speak to. On the morning we were leaving, I was waiting in line to use the toilet at the hotel we were staying at before getting the coach to the airport. Super hungover after a heavy night of drinking, blah, blah. Anyway, I'm stood waiting for the toilet, and a guy from the year below walks up behind me. We've never, ever spoken. I awkwardly smile at him and say hi, feeling hungover and an anxious mess. He says to me with a dead serious face, "I pooed my pants earlier. I was walking down Fifth Avenue and I farted but accidentally shat, so I came back and had to clean up." I was obviously gobsmacked. The funny bit is my best friend who came along on the trip but wasn't a student at the uni was sat next to the guy on the plane. He was messaging me saying he could very faintly smell poo. Story 50. I was talking to this girl over FaceTime and we've known each other for just over a week. I was just telling her about my day and I mentioned my coworker named X. She then proceeded to tell me she was assaulted by a guy with the same name. Story 51. A little old lady, probably about 90 years old, was a regular in the cell phone shop I worked in when I was younger. I always took the time to look after her, help her with her phone. Anyway, one day she tells me that she helped her husband die as he was very ill and didn't want to go on. She starts crying and said she'd never told anyone that, and it's been a huge weight off her shoulders. Another time, I bumped into a guy who I'd only ever met once before, and pretty briefly. I say hi. "How's it going?" And he tells me the intricate details of his life, including his teenage sister's drug addiction leading to her death. Story 52. That one guy told me that his ex-wife got divorced from him because he used to beat her. He said it just like that out of nowhere and like it was normal. He also was about to get married for the third time and was around 40. Story 53. I don't know why, but people who barely know me seem to love telling me about themselves unprovoked. The one that comes to mind right now is when I worked at a call center. I was sat next to a woman who told me all about her pregnancy, not just casual aspects of it though, like her mucus plug falling out, her baby daddy making Craigslist personal ads to have affairs, how much milk she was producing. I literally would turn around to look at my monitor, and she would just continue talking to the back of my head. That woman assaulted my ears. I wanted to nope the hell out of there, but seats were assigned. Moms and moms-to-be, please do not tell me about that. I promise you, I do not want to know. Story 54. My wife and I were going to pick up Christmas gifts from a family member of hers. No big deal. As we were walking up to the house, my wife turns and tells me, "Oh, BTW asterisk, Nancy asterisk caught her daughter having 18 plus last summer. Don't bring it up." I was standing there like WTF and the front door opened. I was face to face with asterisk Nancy asterisk. In the next hour, I was left wondering which two had sex because I counted 5 kids there that day. Ages 10, 17, 3 girls and 2 boys. When we left, I asked which two found out. It was deaf strange. Story 55. My now Bill come over to our apartment to do laundry one day. This was the first time I had ever met him. So we are talking and he starts telling me about this chick he have sex. Okay, cool. Good for him, right? Well then, he pulls out his phone and starts showing me her nudes. It was hella awkward. Story 56. This guy in college. We were both up late studying in the dorm's common room, so I thought I'd take a break and chat a bit. After a while, he comes out with this story about how as a kid, he hilariously pranked the girl next door. This involved stealing her dog, then raising it above the neighbor girl's fence so she could see it. Oh, she screamed and screamed. It was hilarious. Man, she loved that dog. Crazy. Guy immediately moves to the top of my brand new, most likely to become a serial killer list. And I nope out real fast. Avoided him like the plague after that. Story 57. Didn't happen to me, but a girl I worked with once pulled our colleague, our department manager, and the director's PA into the bathroom, pulled down her pants, and proceeded to show them her pussy. She did this on her first day. Story 58. I met a guy once at work. We talked for about 5 minutes, and he was suspiciously way too nice. After a few minutes later, and just to give me context, he told me he had attempted DUCKED several times, and that he could be violent sometimes. We kept talking like it was nothing for like 15 more minutes. During all the conversation, he never stopped smiling. Story 59. In my second year of high school, I ended up in a class with a girl who liked to be the victim. After knowing her for a short while, she started telling me in detail about her multiple attempts die, how her dad would hit her, and that he would start self-harm right in front of her. But he didn't do it correctly, so she had to show him how to do it properly. She would also tell in graphic detail about how she liked to do it. Most of what she said about was lies. She often had exposed arms, and there was hardly any marks on them at all. A guy who sat down next to me on a train once wanted to teach me how to make explosive gases by moving air back and forth between my lungs and my bowels. A former drug addict who had found the Lord once stopped me in a parking lot and told me that he could heal my asthma with the power of Jesus. Then he started using his hands to guide the divine powers through me. I did not have asthma after he was finished, but I did not have it before he started either. So the jury is still out on how well this healing technique actually worked, but at least it was nice of him to be concerned about a stranger's well-being. That's more than I can say about some other people I have met. Story 60. First time going out with some new coworkers. Woman around my age, late 20s, explained how she resented her boyfriend for his habit of doing himself good, as she considered it cheating on her. She also proceeded to explain that she doesn't like sex. Not only is this a very inappropriate topic for coworkers, it shows a very sad and bleak view of relationships, as well as a very jealous and spiteful nature. I've been avoiding her entirely after this, in case it helps paint a more complete picture. She is conventionally attractive, has good health and fitness, is proficient at her job, and is making a good salary for the area we live in. Story 61. Was in a bar in Tokyo and another foreigner started chatting me up. There were a few girls who we talked to, but nothing was really happening. He had some suggestions for other places to drink, so we took a train up to Shibuya. On the way, he decided, unprompted, to let me know the girl at the last bar said she was 23 but was probably lying, which made me internally freak out and happy we got out of there. But he followed up with, yeah, she was probably 27 or so, which is way too old for me. Setting the stage, this guy was white and looked 30-ish, balding and with a gut. Spoke fluent Japanese, so he was super confident chatting up random girls. I asked why 27 was too old. He was older than her, right? He followed up with, yeah, I usually try to meet girls under 20, preferably still teenagers. I've hooked up with a few of my high school students. Younger the better. I didn't even answer. Just got myself lost in the crowd once we got off the train at Shibuya Station and never saw the guy again. Story 62. I had a new manager trying to shoot the crap with me. He was telling me about smoking in the Navy during the 70s. He told me there was a narc on his ship. So he and some friends told the narc that there was a huge exchange going down at midnight at the front of the ship. The guys fanged up on him, beat the tar out of him, wrapped him on a carpet, and threw him off the side. I asked what happened to the dude. He just said, dunno. Did anyone get him out of the ocean? Dunno. Did he die? Dunno. Nobody asked about him? No one ever talked about it again. I was like, well, nice to meet you, Abe. He goes, call me Pops. Story 63? Just moved into a new loft building. The downstairs neighbor stumbled out back drunk while I was having a smoke after work. He told me how his wife left. I sat with him for hours, telling him it gets better and life goes on and to keep his head up. I invited him up for dinner, but he declined. Told me to have a good night, that he appreciated that I sat with him, thanked me for the smokes, and that he was going to bed. I woke up the next morning and went down for a smoke to find police and ambulance there. He died. His door was wide open and his cell phone was ringing non-stop. His ringtone was that song, Lonely. I am so lonely. I went upstairs to my wife and bursted into tears. It's burned into my memory. I didn't know him at all, but I wish there was more I could have done. Story 64. Sat on an Amtrak across from a very sweet older man who within 20 minutes was telling me about the purpose of his trip to Maryland to meet his biological father, who he had discovered via 23andMe to discuss changing his last name, which was the condition of being the sole inheritor of his father's estate, and that he was feeling a little guilty about that because his 3 half-sisters would be excluded from their father's will because he finally had a legacy. Woof. He disembarked 20 minutes later, and I have thought about it constantly for the following 4 years. Story 65. I, mechanic, had a customer thank me for agreeing to work on his car because he had just got out of jail and most places wouldn't let him in. I would have had no idea if he hadn't mentioned it. He was, I'm guessing, 50-ish. Story 66. Moved to a neighborhood not too long ago. First person I meet was an older woman in her 50s. She told me all about addictions and how sometimes she ends up outside naked and asked if I would help her back inside and put clothes on her. This was all in 5 minutes of saying hello. Story 67. Definitely going to get buried, and it's not ducked up that the person shared it, but rather that these events happened. A friend of mine and I were sleeping on some couches after a party, and we got to talking. More so her than me. I'm definitely a better listener than talker. She confided in me that she watched her boyfriend, might have been fiancé, died in front of her. She also told me how she and her best friend of years, someone I knew for a very short time, and her had been urban exploring on a smokestack catwalk, in an abandoned paper mill, and she watched her friend miss a step and fall. She wasn't making these things up either. The next day, I mentioned to our mutual friend that she had opened up to me about this stuff, and he confirmed it was sadly true about the boyfriend died. The accidental death I had known about through news. I didn't know she was the person with her, though. Poor girl witnessed the loss of two very important people to her, and at the time she was only 19, 20 when she told me this. I hope talking to a near stranger helped, though, even if all I did was listen. Story 68. Old buddy had a bit of a crackhead neighbor, but he was nice enough. One day we asked him to get us some beers. We were like 17. He's like no prob. So we're drinking a few with him, and he starts talking about how much he hated German shepherds and how the old neighbors had too. One day he was walking and then one bit him on the bicep and wouldn't let go. Saw the scars. It was kind of gnarly. He's laughing his ass off. And he then tells us that he walked down the street to the elementary school and threw it out in their dumpster. Super weird dude. He's since moved. Story 69. Sitting at the bar, watching a ball game with the other random barflies one day, I'm trading typical dude banter about the game with this guy beside me. A few innings in, a few pints later, and he starts telling me about how he was abused and how he'd been through a number of therapists that all minimized his experience. I've never encountered that kind of honesty in anyone before, let alone a stranger. All I could do was tell him it wasn't his fault and offer him a hug. I gave him my FB info and told him if he ever needed to talk to someone or wanted help finding resources, etc., to not hesitate to contact me. He never did. I wonder what he's doing now. Story 70. Back in college, I went to a community clinic for my birth control. One day, I sat alone in an empty waiting room. A young man about my age come in wearing a stained white t-shirt and baggy gray sweatpants. He smelled awful. He sat right beside me. Within moments, he began to tell me the most impressive story he could think of. Unfortunately, this story was about going on Jerry Springer. He proceeded to tell me that Jerry put them up in a nice hotel with unlimited amounts of alcohol. He told me about his trip on stage and that his junk fell out of hit pants, and then used gesture to show me how grabbed and flung his balls on national television. I sat there holding my breath, begging for the nurse to call me back. A few moments later, the nurse called my name, closed the door behind me and said, "I don't have anywhere for you, but you looked like you needed an out. Just sit in here for a few. Thank you, nurse. Thank you." Story 71? He told me his wife has sex this other guy. And the only reason he found out is because he drove by the house. He was an electrician at the time. And his lawnmower was in his yard instead of in his garage. He doesn't stop, but rather when he gets off shift, the dude is still there and moved the lawnmower so he could fit his truck in the garage. Dude leaves and doesn't even move the lawnmower back. It was the third time I even talked to this new guy, and he had already told a few other people about his problem. That was why he didn't want to work overtime anymore, because he was still with her and afraid she would do it again. Story 72. Oh man, a few years ago, we hired this new cook. Nice enough guy, just a little eccentric. We caught him doing karate moves on the railing out back. He ran home to get his banking info for direct deposit during the orientation when the manager told him he could just bring it in the next day. Stuff like that. Anyway, one day during a dinner shift, I'm in the server station with my work wife, and we're just getting stuff ready for our tables and such, and out walks Andrew. I'm like, "Oh, hey man, how's it going?" "Not so good. I got some bad news today." And me, like an idiot, asks, "Oh no, do you want to talk about it?" "Yeah, I got my friend this kidney off the black market, but it was the wrong blood type, guys. I'm not going to lie to you. I don't even remember the rest of the conversation after that sentence. I think I blocked it out. All I remember is, 'Sorry man, good luck,' as he walked away, and then looking at my work wife like I heard him wrong, right? And her confirming that we did in fact hear him correctly. Story 73. A coworker and I went to a chain restaurant for lunch, where we decided to eat at the bar. While filling up our drinks, the bartender started telling us about how his boss kept yelling at him for doing substances behind the bar in front of customers. He also told us if his boss complained again, he was going to kick his boss's ass. Story 74. Work in retail and started a new job 3 months or so before this. A customer came in on a quiet morning and started complaining his church friends are jealous of him because he owns his own house. They're mean to him. It's not fair. And they're bullying him and calling him bad words. "I respect children," he said while slamming his hand on my counter. That's when I knew his church friends are probably right. Story 75. Went on one date with a guy who told me during the date, in a car, alone, at night, parked on an empty street, that he doesn't experience emotions and just studies and mimics how others show emotion. He also said he views life as a video game where he's the sole player and no one else has a life or their own thoughts. Like the Wikipedia checklist of a sociopath, I ghosted him after that. Story 76. I'm not sure if this is appropriate because I was at an AA meeting, but there was a dude who admitted to watching CP to everyone after going on a rant about getting his law degree and knowing all sorts of famous people. I just sat there like, "Can you rewind that? Hef, did you say?" Story 77 was showing a vendor where our back room at my work was. Had never seen her before. She had said she had only worked for that company for a month. She told me all about how her roommate's girlfriend got a restraining order against her, and how she got arrested earlier that day because she doesn't know about the restraining order and all this crazy stuff about how the other lady was crazy and lying. My manager later told me that she told him that she was wearing the only pair of underwear she owns. Story 78. 15 minutes into a 6 a.m. flight, the person sitting next to me showing me the track marks on their arm, but trying to do better. In her defense, flying made her nervous, so I assumed she just needed to talk. Also offered me a substances, which I guess was sweet of her. Story 79. Hired an older plumber in his 60s at the company I worked at when I was an apprentice, and I got put with him during his first week. Within 10 minutes of meeting him, the small talk topic of his choice was that his mail order Thai wife had died a few months ago, and that he's been plowing through prostitutes. And he recommends hiring a Cambodian woman as they are, by far, the best in bed. Story 80. A guy who provided a room for me whilst I worked nearby told me he was involved in the Sri Lankan Civil War during 2008. He told me some real ducked-up crap while he was drunk on his birthday. If someone provides free booze, I'm going to sit and listen to anyone even if they were involved in a war, which he was. Story 81. I spoke to the kid in school everyone else was too scared to talk to, plus unfortunately he had an odor. And one time at a school dance, high school, he told me he hated everyone and wanted to blow up the school. Thankfully, I talked him down from it, and we became friends. Turns out he was autistic and had a hard time adjusting which kids at the school made fun of him for, plus his hygiene habits made it a recipe for bullying in a small-town school. Smart kid, though. Like genius smart. Good guy, too. Story 82. I was at a work-related event, and the host broke us into small groups for icebreakers. None of us had ever met before. The first question was a generic, "What's a challenge you've had to overcome?" Someone talked about being the first in the family to graduate. Someone was a minority business owner. Someone had struggled to figure out their job until taking extra training. That kind of thing. Then the last guy deadpan says, "The biggest challenge I've faced was probably holding my wife's hand as she gave birth, in the back of a car, to another man's baby." What an incredible first and only thing to know about a person. Story 83. I was included into a group of friends through a common one. I'd known this girl for like 2 weeks. We were alone and she casually dropped that she likes to cheat on her BF. We were waiting for her BF. She then asked if I wanted to make out. It was so surreal. Story 84. Met a guy in a pub who very quickly started talking about how he loved it when his missus shat on a glass coffee table while he lay under it. His missus was sitting next to him and she piped up with, "Yeah, he loves it when I do that." Story 85. I work in retail, and the other day I got a phone call from someone wanting to ask about the procedure to get some house measurements and stuff. The people who do that, we gone for the day, so I told them to call or come in later, a couple-minute call. 0.30 minutes late, I know about her kid, her broken back, how she's talking to federal agencies, and a lot of extra details. Thank you, person, for making me stay past my shift 20 minutes. Story 86. Me and my manager would often be together during closing shift at the grocery store I used to work at. He once broke down telling me how ducked his life is due to his job. Working 6, sometimes 7 days a week, starting from 8 a.m. to 9 p.m., on top of a 40-minute commute, so he needs to wake up at like 6 a.m. to get to work on time. He's not married, has no kids, lives alone, is severely depressed. When I showed up to work one day, I saw him just slouched in the employee lounge, just staring at the TV, super lifeless with a massive beard. He looked just so done with life, and I was like, duck. I really do hope he's okay. It's been a couple of years since I've worked at that grocery store, so technically less ducked up and more just a sad story. Story 87. This one lady comes into my work regularly, but I don't really know her too well. I know basic stuff about her, and she knows a little about me. Apparently not enough, though. One day she said to me, because there was a gay couple who was ahead of her, "I just can't stand those kinds of people. I honestly don't think they should be allowed to live. It's digesting me." Being the petty bisexual I am, said, "Well, sorry, but I'm going to continue living." I think it took her a minute to realize what I implied. Story 88. When I started this job 12 hours ago, my first boss told me, in my first week, that he found it awkward hugging his niece as she was getting older because he could feel her tits pressing into him. Thankfully, I was only in that particular team for 3 months and I've never seen him since, but what if? And this is in a very professional corporate environment and he had a well-established career. Story 89. I was very sick, just trying to buy cold medicine, and somehow the cashier ended up telling me about her dad's struggle with alcoholism as I stood there trying not to let my entire brain leak out of my nose. Story 90. On a first date, after 3 drinks, the young anesthesiologist I met on Tinder revealed he'd been experimenting with microdosing shrooms for his depression. A few drinks later, he revealed the micro was an exaggeration, and that he often was tripping at work while administering meds. When we parted, he stuffed a handful of shrooms into my pocket and told me it wasn't safe for him to have access to so many. Hope he's okay. His patients, too. Story 91. A girl I work with told me that when she was 7, her dad asked her if she wanted to see something cool. The girl went into the lounge room with her dad. Dad then walks over and behind the girl's mom and hit her. I'm rarely speechless, but that one had me mute. Mom survived. Story 92. I was on the bus going somewhere, and some dude I know from seeing around some mutual friends gets on, sits opposite me and starts talking about himself and tells me very matter-of-factly, among other things, about how he collects all he can about Joseph Mengele. Story 93. Happened recently. I started working a job about a month ago and had talked to one of my coworkers maybe 2 times. She comes up to me the 3rd day and feels the need to tell me she went to the doctor and has a yeast infection. I work at a preschool for context. I'm still unsure of how to process the whole encounter. Story 94. I was in the supply closet getting something with a new coworker, and all of a sudden he says, "I just remembered I was molested by a man a few years ago. I'm not gay though. I had known him for like a week."